Welcome to the show. I'm Sean Drochar. This is Sandy Clough. Danny Bailey producing the show for Mile High Sports. Thanks for joining us as we look at the sports scene today, Sandy, especially now a few days removed from the disastrous weekend in which the Avalanche and the Nuggets were unceremoniously, as I mentioned before, there's no ceremonious way to go out, I suppose, dumped from the playoffs. The idea of what a dynasty means is kind of interesting because now in the NBA, we're looking at what's going to be now the fifth consecutive year, or is it sixth now, in which the fifth year in which the champion gets bounced in the second round. It's going to be the sixth year of a different champion now, sixth year in the NBA. So parity has hit the NBA. Michael Malone, the Nuggets coach, after the championship last year at the parade, was talking about dynasty, was talking about running it back, winning 2 in a row, bringing Bruce Brown back. Those things didn't happen. I get it. The heady moments of parade and all the excitement they're in, and maybe a handful of adult beverages tossed your way from the crowd over the course of the parade maybe changes the way you look at things. But you brought up an interesting point when we talk about the show, and we don't just show up and wing it. We actually do plan it. The idea that dynasties are not the same as they used to be, not only in the NBA, of course, where we haven't seen one probably since the Warriors, but across sports, as parity is basically part of every league, baked into every league, and it's good for every league because it's good for every fan base. But the idea of what a dynasty is, based on the years, you think about all the Lakers and the Celtics, or UCLA in those years in college
those
basketball.
Days are gone.
And those days
Dynasties
are gone because
like that will never develop again.
And they vanished because of free
agency.
agency. Because once free agency hit, those days were gone. Because obviously with the lack of player movement, once you had a great team, they couldn't leave and go get more money elsewhere, a la Bruce Brown. Now they can. So Kurt Flood with free agency in 1974 in baseball, it got all the way down to basketball in the early 80s. And then things just aren't what they used to be. Those eras are finished. So what does a dynasty look like today? In the Ringer, early in the preseason, Calvin Booth, the Nuggets GM, talked about the idea of a dynasty nowadays, not necessarily being 2 or 3 in a row, but likened a little bit more to the Golden State Warriors, or teams where you win a handful within a sequence of years, but not necessarily consecutively.
And even Michael Malone, perhaps upon further sober reflection, and a little bit of
literal and figurative,
it'll be, I think it'll be viewed, maybe that final press conference, not quite Nixon's. You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore, but a press conference that will go down in infamy around here after the Game 7 loss on Sunday night. Even Michael Malone, and he said this before, acknowledged that San Antonio Spurs had a dynasty, never won 2 in a row. The San Antonio Spurs won 5 titles in 16 years. They were in 6 NBA finals. They lost one, actually, that they should have won in 2013 against the Miami Heat, came back and won the next year, also won in 99, 03, 05, 07. And I agree with Malone. I think that is a dynasty, certainly by today's standards. But I think Malone and other coaches think of dynasties as winning 2 out of 3, 3 in a row. And I'm not sure you're going to see much of that. I take, for example, the Tampa Bay Lightning in hockey. Yes, won 2 in a row, but they won them during COVID years, shortened seasons, less wear and tear.
Got to 3 finals in a row.
I will give them this, though. They did get to 3 finals in succession. They
lost
the third one to the Avalanche in 2022. But if you're talking about existing dynasties, right now I think you have one in sports, and that's the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL, who have won 8 straight AFC West titles. They have gone to 4 Super Bowls in 5 years. They've won 3 of those Super Bowls and lost just the one to Tampa Bay. That was fairly one-sided. The Super Bowl wins have tended to be close, come from behind efforts by the Chiefs. But 4 Super Bowls in 5 years and winning 3 is pretty good, and they may just be getting started with Patrick Mahomes still in his 20s at quarterback.
It feels like it. Obviously, when you talk about those sort of situations, dynasties at all, and football is the hardest one in which to build them. I mean, we've never had a champion win 3 in a row. It's never occurred.
Never a Super Bowl
champion
winning
right.
3 in a row. Now, the Green Bay Packers won
NFL
the National
champions.
Football League in 1965 when the two leagues were still separate. In 1966, you had the first Super Bowl. Green Bay won that over Kansas City and then beat Oakland, the Raiders, in 1967 in the second Super Bowl game that was, at the beginning at least, referred to as the AFL-NFL or the NFL-AFL championship game. So Green Bay did win 3 in a row, but no one has ever won 3 straight Super Bowls. There have been dynasties, but nobody's won 3 straight. New England won 2 straight. Pittsburgh won 2 in a row in the 70s. Didn't get back to the Super Bowl for a couple of years, and then won 2 more in a row for 4 and 6 years. Is that a dynasty? Absolutely, in my view.
When you look at the AFC West, especially too, on top of that, it's a division in the NFL that's had an awful lot of success. The Chiefs, with their most recent Super Bowl championship, passed the Broncos and the Raiders, who had 3 Super Bowl victories apiece in their history, along with the Chiefs. The Chiefs got their 4th in the previous season. But you go look at the AFC West, and we'll get more into the Broncos as the show goes along. But how about this? Even though the Chargers that we know have never won a Super Bowl. Okay. And then
they've been to one,
lost it, and that was it. But it's pretty remarkable when you look at the total number of playoff berths by that division. The Chiefs and the Texans, because we're going to count this is the only division that was also all AFL teams. The Chiefs have 26 playoff appearances, the Raiders 23, the Broncos 22, the Chargers 19, all pretty close. How about this? The number of times they've won the AFL or AFC West. Chargers, Raiders, Broncos, 15 times. The Chiefs last year made it 16. That's how historically even that really has been. And to separate yourself out to the point where you become a current dynasty in this age for the salary cap of the NFL, it is stunning. To my mind, not only is it the only dynasty in major sports, it's also, to me, by far the most impressive.
But the majority of dynasties, if you look at all the major professional sports in this century, are more the Calvin Booth model for dynasties, where they're spread out. Golden State 4 and 8 years, you mentioned. San Antonio 5 and 16 years. Hey, the Lakers won 5 and 11 years. Some with Shaq and some without Shaq, all with Kobe. That's a pretty good run. Yeah. I would call that a dynasty. Some of these dynasties overlap a little bit. Lakers and Spurs, for example, overlapped. In New England, in the NFL, won 6 Super Bowls in 18 years, but more impressively, were actually in 9 Super Bowls over an 18-year period. Every other year, they went to the Super Bowl. They won 6, they lost 3. That's a dynasty. But never did they win 3 in a row. They won 2 in a row once. Remember, on the back half,
think about it, right?
They won in 14, 16, and 18.
And then kept
never 2 in a row.
Eli Manning here and there to derail things.
07
obviously.
And 2011.
Yeah, but the idea of dynasty in football obviously has probably never really been the way you think about it in those other sports, because no one's ever won 3 titles in a row. But even in baseball, when you're talking about probably the Houston Astros being the closest one, at least the most recent, still the Astros not only have not exactly swept everything, right now they're awful. I mean, it's hard to maintain that sort of thing.
They're getting better, but they got off to a horrendous start this year. And excluding last year, they had a 6-year run of 2 World Series wins, 2 losses in the World Series, and of course the garbage can scandal that perhaps diminished them some, as Spygate diminished the Patriots during the middle of their dynastic run. But simply in terms of achievement, going to 4 World Series in a 6-year period is pretty good in a sport like baseball that prides itself on parity.
Yeah, and has the fewest, at least now that it's expanded the wild card a little bit, but has still had the fewest teams out of its league percentage-wise make the postseason. So it's even harder to get there in baseball. We talked a little bit about the Warriors, obviously, and that is the most recent one, and even that seems to be almost in a distant past. But when you look at what the Nuggets are trying to accomplish as far as a dynasty, and certainly the idea of back-to-back has gone by the wayside, unless you want to throw the crystal ball a few years into the future. The idea is if they were to go back and hypothetically win the title again next season, win 2 and 3 years, get to the second round, would that be the beginning of a dynasty?
I think it would begin to raise the possibility that they could win a third. And again, Calvin Booth's idea was 3 and 6 years.
Right. Every other year idea that you were
like
talking with the Patriots.
Yes. A little bit like the Golden State dynasty, maybe even a little bit like the San Antonio dynasty. The problem in forecasting too far ahead for the Nuggets is that Nikola Jokic has 4 years left on his contract. And the so-called window slams shut at the end of that 4-year contract.
Yes.
If he chooses to move into retirement, he would be in his early 30s. He would have played in the league for well over a decade by then. And if you saw him at the end of this year, you saw an exhausted player who had 3 people, not 1, not 2, but 3 people banging on him over the course of about 2 weeks in a best-of-7 series that went the distance. And by the end of the series, whether you choose to pick out the final 21, 22 minutes of the game on Sunday night or just the fourth quarter when he played every minute of the fourth quarter, you're talking about someone who had nothing left to give by the end of the game and was reduced, rather than getting banged around in the low post, reduced to taking 3-pointers. And I think we have to take that into account, that if you look at all these dynasties that we've referred to, or many dynasties, however you choose to characterize them, these are deep teams we're talking about. I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs lost Tyreek Hill, a premier receiver, perhaps the fastest receiver in all of the National Football League. They've missed him for 2 years, but they haven't. They've won 2 Super Bowls in 2 years. They found other ways to win. They've found other ways, not as prolific, but other ways still to be an effective passing team, especially as last year went on. The sacks went down, the interceptions went down, the drop passes, which were of epidemic proportions earlier in the year for the Chiefs, the drops went down too, especially in the playoffs.
Well, Nikola Jokic will be beginning his 10th season next year, as you pointed out. And so obviously for the idea of the Nuggets getting a dynasty going, let's just worry about competing for one at a time. And they got one last year. I'd like to go get it again. How can they make the bench better? It's harder than you probably think. We'll talk about that in a moment.
Well, we talked about fish and chips. GB Fish and Chips before, and you've heard their signature ads for years on this program. By now, you probably know that locally owned and operated GB Fish and Chips has the best drinks, meat pies, and fish and chips this side of the pond. But did you know that GB Fish and Chips caters? Yes, with graduation and summer block party season around the corner, give your family and friends a unique fry-on-site experience. The best part of catering, you don't have to do any work. Obviously, they do all the work. GB Fish and Chips does everything. Stop by any of their 4 metro locations or visit gbfishandchips.com and bring authentic fish and chips to your next gathering. That's gbfishandchips.com.
Well, as we take a look at the Nuggets and we look at the idea of what they need, we know that the starting 5 is solid. For the last couple of years, they've been the best starting five by most advanced metrics in basketball in the last 2 regular seasons. That in of itself may be a bit of a mini dynasty when you're talking about the starting five. But when you get into the bench, things get ugly. We talked about some of this a little bit yesterday with Ryan Blackburn, the host of the Pickaxe and Roll podcast. But when you talk about the idea of improving the bench, and let's just even set aside the idea that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope could and likely will decline his player option and become a free agent, and there's no clear way in which you can replace him dollar for dollar because of the Nuggets cap situation. We'll get into that in a bit too. But how do they improve this bench? Because when you look at the way they played, some of it based on the players, some of it based on the way they were used, the starting five had a rough time because they couldn't even use the bench, and they were unusually inefficient given the fact that they didn't have any rest in the playoffs.
That's correct. And they became more and more inefficient as the playoffs continued on. There were 12 playoff games this year for the Nuggets. We've talked endlessly about how they were behind, not tied and behind, but just behind 70% of the time, almost 70% of the time in the series against the Lakers. Well, it wasn't quite that one-sided, obviously, in the Minnesota series, wild series. Minnesota wins 2 in Denver. Denver wins 2 in Minnesota. Road team wins every one of the first 4 games. Then it becomes a home court series for games 5 and 6. And all of a sudden in game 7, it is both a home court game for roughly 26 minutes.
Right.
And then for 22 minutes, it's a road team game. It goes from 50-38 to 32-60 from the Nugget point of view, in almost splitting the game in half.
And that's because the home team ran out of gas.
They did.
Because you didn't have enough help coming off the bench.
Christian Brown played minutes with the game on the line, with the game competitive. He was the only bench player who saw any playing time. And as it turns out, compared to last season, the Nugget bench was minus 4.5 points. They only averaged 10.2 minutes per game in the playoffs. That was last among all playoff teams. The Nuggets used their starters more and their bench less than any team in the NBA playoffs. And I'm talking about all 16 of them.
Yep. And obviously, when you talk about a team that had clear fatigue issues by the end, that's one of the things you'll have to look at. Now, some of that leads to Michael Malone and the idea that in Malone's case, you needed to play the bench more, even if you didn't love them, even if you didn't trust them. But I looked at this earlier in the week. The idea that Michael Malone didn't play the bench, it's to me not so bothersome about seeing him in this series. And I'm not surprised we didn't see it in the series against Minnesota, because Malone didn't necessarily invest the time on the court during the course of the season to get these guys ready to play. And that's part of the concern. When Calvin Booth brought in Julian Strawther and Hunter Tyson and Jalen Pickett, all experienced players, the idea was they'd make a quick transition to the NBA. Then Michael Malone would be able to coach them up, get them at least accustomed to the process, and let them hopefully soak up minutes later in the season, into the playoffs, giving the starting five a break. The problem was Malone didn't either trust or, for whatever reason, believe into those young players and didn't play them, because Malone, while he's not as wired as he used to be, Sandy, at trying to go win 82 games, he still isn't quite Greg Popovich when you're looking at the ones you can just punt and move on from. He's not scheduling it out. So this is going to be one of the challenges for the Nuggets going forward, because while that part's on Malone, the other part of it may be on the players themselves. The Nuggets bench shot 35.4% from the field, 30.3% on three-pointers in the playoffs.
Right.
We went back to some of what we saw a couple years ago, that when Nikola Jokic left the floor, whatever lead the Nuggets might have compiled immediately disappeared, and Jokic had to come back in and catch the team back up again. We saw that again. And so a couple different things failed at once. The way the coach handled the bench was problematic, but the way the bench even played was problematic. All of that leads to an early exit for the Nuggets.
Which is the better idea when it comes to building a bench? Do you sign year by year, maybe one or two at a time, veterans who won't break the bank, but will not necessarily be controllable contracts over a period of time?
And I think that's part of it.
As rookies will be.
The Avalanche do that, for example.
You have with the Nuggets, you have Christian Brown, You have Peyton Watson. You have Julian Strother. You have Hunter Tyson, and you have Zeke Najee. And did I mention Jalen Pickett? Or did I pass him over?
You skipped him over, much like Michael Malone.
That is, I believe, half a dozen players. You are building your bench at that point with controllable contracts. I'm not sure that's the way most coaches, in this case Michael Malone, would prefer to construct a bench.
Especially to make a
Brown
playoff
was
run.
a veteran last year. I'm talking about Bruce Brown.
Right.
Jeff Green had played for about half the teams in the NBA before he came to Denver. He was certainly a grizzled veteran. They were, for long stretches last year, the two players Malone trusted most coming off the bench. The Nuggets were 25th points per game this year during the regular season from their bench. That's not terrible. I mean, there were five. They're not in the bottom five.
They're close to it.
But they're close.
It's pretty bad.
And in the playoffs, that became more extreme. They were 16th out of 16.
Right.
In the playoffs.
Well, presumably some of those teams that were between 26 and the bottom of the league didn't make the playoffs.
Right.
It's part of it.
But, again, I look at a team like Boston last night, and Boston did not play anywhere close to its usual standards. But from the five starters, they got a lot of production, so much so that it didn't matter that Pritchard and Cornette and Hauser did basically nothing. They still scored 133 points. The Nuggets don't have 5-point producers. They have a good starting five, but it isn't good because they score a lot. If you want the best scoring starting five, the best offensive starting five, the best offensive group of five in the NBA, it's the Boston Celtics. Night after night after night, they all can score. Horford's the one who maybe got a few more than you'd expect last night with the 15 points he scored, but it's 15 points in a 53-minute game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like he went bananas. Tatum had a typical Tatum game, a superstar game. Jaylen Brown had a superstar game. White had a terrific game. And Drew Holiday played his best game as a Boston Celtic last night. So they got the production they needed, even though their defense wasn't great, even though if there was a game where you looked at it and said they really miss Kristaps Porzingis tonight, it was the game last night. And Porzingis, when he's in the lineup, he replaces Horford. Mm-hmm. Horford comes off the bench and Porzingis is capable of scoring 20, 25 on a given night.
Yeah, and that's why I look at Boston and Minnesota as the teams to advance.
I agree. Best offensive team, best defensive team.
That's the trick, and they have depth. So for the Nuggets, the challenge is, given the luxury tax situation, we talked about this with Ryan Blackburn yesterday, the idea that even if Kentavious Caldwell-Pope leaves and declines his $15.1 million option, it doesn't help. You can't replace him with $15.1 million. There are a lot of drawbacks being where the Nuggets are right now in that second apron of the tax.
They are, in essence, a second apron team right now.
Yes.
Because if you brought back the team as currently constructed for another run next year, you'd be a second.
And that would, assuming the Caldwell-Pope accepts the option, takes $15.4 million, and that would be a pretty good deal for the Nuggets. They'd be delighted if he took it. But yes, even as it stands right now, and keep in mind, here's how top heavy it is. Nikola Jokic next year's cap hits $51.4 million. Jamal Murray, $36 million even. Michael Porter Jr., $35.9. Aaron Gordon, $23.8. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, presuming he opts back in, and everything we at least understand is that he won't, but that would be $15.4. But then the next highest paid player on the team makes $8.9 million next year. And it's Zeke Najee, who hasn't been able to play dead in a Western, as my dad used to say. Reggie Jackson has a player option that he might be able to take for $5.3 million. The decline in his game is very real. Then Christian Brown at $3 million, then Julian Strother at 2.5, Watson at 2.4, Vlatko Chanchar, by the way, still injured, but not missed the year, 2.3, Jalen Pickett at 1.9, and Hunter Tyson at 1.9. All of those guys behind the starting five, starting with Najee at 8.9, you're still a second apron team.
Absolutely.
Still a second
course.
team. So where do you add? You're going to have to find a way to somehow move on from Najee, but who wants to take on Zeke Najee's contract of almost $9 million a year for a guy who simply can't find his way onto a court on a Nuggets team that was desperate to have him soak up some minutes? So there's probably no help there. The only, I guess, option, we talked about it a little bit yesterday, is you could try to trade Michael Porter Jr., though I'm not really sure you're going to get a lot of takers that would upgrade your team, even though I guess you could shuffle around some money. But for the Nuggets, it's not just about shuffling around the money. It's about finding a way to get better. And it feels like going forward for the Nuggets, the only way to get better is the young guys that are on the roster have to get better. They have to get better, which means they've got to play, and it means they've got to get coached up. And whether Michael Malone wants to do that or not doesn't really matter. If fans that were upset with Calvin Booth got their way and Calvin Booth quit, got fired, got hired somewhere else, whatever, the new GM doesn't have any more flexibility to add players than Calvin Booth. That's just the nature of it. And some of this is Booth. A lot of this is Tim Connolly. And the Minnesota Timberwolves now may end up winning a title because the final touches.
They'll have to pay the piper.
They'll pay it as well. And so building the team to make that run, eventually you have to pay that bill. The problem with the Nuggets is where it feels like the window opened, as you talked about. It feels like it opened for Nuggets fans when they won last year, but it didn't. Nikola Jokic will turn 30 next year. The window has been open for a while, given their starting five talent. The problem was injuries to Murray and to Michael Porter Jr. derailed potential years where they could have made a deeper run. This window is closer to the end than it is the beginning. And if it's going to stay open, it's going to require Michael Malone to do something he doesn't want to do and hasn't done, and that is commit to younger players, whether they are good, bad, or indifferent, and try to make them better than they are today.
I think of the three, Julian Strawther was the one who showed some signs, at least offensively, early in the season of being able to help.
Mm-hmm.
He, regardless of how you view the chronology, fell out of favor and got injured and was at least in the process of falling out of favor. The other two never really got a look.
No,
I get that, but injuries are impossible to plan for. And when it got to the end of the season and Murray had the calf injury and also other ailments that beset him during the course of the year, and Jackson had a bad ankle, and Caldwell Pope had a bad ankle, who are you going to turn to? Jalen Pickett?
And the funny thing is, that's, I guess, what you look at. You can't plan for injuries, at least when they happen, but you can plan for the eventualities of injuries, and that's by making sure your young guys are ready to contribute when they're called upon.
When Jamal Murray tore his ACL in the spring of 2021, did the Nuggets necessarily forecast that he would miss 150 games between that point and the end of this season? Regular season games,
right.
Not playoff games.
They didn't think he'd miss as many even at first.
Or not. He plays in playoff games. But 150 games missed, you have to take that into consideration.
You better start preparing for it next year. They're going to have to prepare for it next year. And it's a weird spot because Christian Braun is better cast as a sixth man. You might have to look at Julian Strawther as a starter if Kentavious Caldwell-Pope goes somewhere else, because that's just what the money means. That's the reality for Nuggets
fans. And that's why they drafted him, right? Yeah. Because he was a veteran college player, and a scorer, on one of the premier programs in the country, Gonzaga.
Exactly. So the cap dictates a lot of this, and it's harder when you're the champion. So we'll take a look at a moment when we look at the cap for the Nuggets and for the Avalanche. Take a look, compare and contrast for these two teams that look to be on the cusp of titles, of which one's in better shape to be able to make a move and get one next season after these messages from Zainer Harden-Law.
And, of course, as we were just discussing, no one plans to be part of a car accident or sustain a major injury. Just don't. But if you've been involved in one, you know you need an attorney and you need the best. You need to call Zainer Harden-Law. Kurt Zainer, Mark Harden are the kinds of lawyers you want handling your case. Two of the most elite personal injury lawyers in Colorado and in America. They've won nearly every award imaginable. They've appeared in the Denver Post, local news channels, and even on Good Morning America. These guys handle the most important cases, and they work in tireless fashion to make make sure our community is a safe place. With multi-million-dollar verdicts and the respect of every insurance company, you're lucky to have these folks in our own backyard. So if you've been involved in an auto accident, reach out to Zaner Harden today at yourstorywill-be-told.com. That's yourstorywill-be-told.com.
And as we start to get into the beautiful spring and summer months in Colorado, you know that even more people are looking to move here as they want to take part of the fine state that we have here in Colorado. And if you're trying to buy a home, one, welcome. Two, hey, we know it's hard. And so let me help you find an easier way to get it done. And that's talking to my friends at Dave and Mark at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado, luxury home team. And when I say Colorado's luxury home team, doesn't mean you have to be in the market for a luxury home. You don't have to be shopping in Aspen or Telluride. I mean, good luck, more power to you. But David and Mark take care of you regardless of what you're looking to buy. A castles to condos, you get that high-end luxury service, whether you're buying or selling. And you need those experts in Colorado because this market has a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And you need someone who can ride them. And you need two things: people with experience and stability who have been here long enough to understand it. Well, Key Real Estate Group, they're as stable as it gets. 25 years, independently owned, privately held, in the same offices. They've been here, they've done that, they've seen it, and that means they can help you. The Fed's still expected to lower interest rates in 2024, so beat the competition and buy your new home before all the summer frenzy returns to Denver. And if you're thinking of a new build, that's great. Obviously, it's the home builders are offering big incentives. They're trying to build more homes in Colorado to try to knock the prices down. But it also means that those home builders don't have to necessarily give you all the incentives that are available. So let Dave and Mark represent you to make sure that you get everything you deserve, even if you're looking at a new build. Here's how you get a hold of them. Call Dave and Mark at Key Real Estate Group today at 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST, or visit them today at keyrealestategroup.com. Sandy, we've looked a little bit at the Nuggets and their cap situation, and we know it's a little bit dire. I mean, that's the reality of it. The Avalanche, when we'll compare and contrast, maybe things aren't quite so bad, because when we look at the Avalanche's situation, things are complicated due to Gabriel Landeskog's injury and to Valeri Nichushkin's suspension, or at least involvement in the players' assistance program. Depends on how you want to term that. But the Avalanche aren't in any sort of apron or luxury tax. One, the NHL doesn't have that. But two, as it stands today, they actually are under the cap. They have $9 million remaining. Yesterday, we talked about some of the players they wanted to and need to get signed and keep long-term, and Jonathan Drouin and Casey Middlestat. We both like Yakov Trenin, Brandon Duhaime. But it seems at the moment as if you might be able to get all those guys and still stay under the cap, and maybe even have a little room to give at least a raise to contract eligible Mikko Rantanen or to goaltender Alexander Georgiev.
I agree. And listen, it's the difference between a hard cap, which exists in the NHL, and the NBA's collective bargaining agreement, which calls for all kinds of exceptions, but has really tightened things up with the new CBA. And the irony is the CBA was negotiated in a manner that would make much more difficult the notion of building super teams, right?
Right.
And that was supposed to help the mid-market teams, smaller market teams like Denver, until Denver unexpectedly, with a second-round pick who wasn't even a top 40 pick the year he was selected, turned into a superstar. And now all of a sudden, they're facing the prospect of maybe even several max contract possibilities. You can get away with 3 if you're contending for titles every year. And that takes us back to our initial conversation today about dynasties. It is tough to create excellence, much less greatness, over a long period of time, because you can't keep your team together. If it wins one championship, everybody is going to want more. The disease of more, right?
Right. Of course.
And that was what Pat Riley talked about many decades ago. And if you have 3 max players, for example, playing like 3 max players, you go win a championship. The rub with the Nuggets is, as glorious as their championship run was last year, they have not in any other year under Michael Malone / Nikola Jokic gotten past the second round of the playoffs. Now, getting to the second round isn't bad. That means in the NBA, you're one of the top 8 teams in the league.
And no other champion in the last 5 years has done any better.
Correct. Under, in some cases, some of the restraints that we're talking about here. In the NHL, you get to the second round, you're 8 or better among 32 teams. That's pretty good. But it's easier in theory in a hard cap sport to do some planning. Yes, the numbers will change and the pre-pandemic numbers will come back and be exceeded as time goes on in the NHL. And I think the forecast for the cap this coming season is something like $87 million, maybe a little more than that. That's the projection. As you suggest, the Avalanche at the present time are well under that figure. Now, you have to decide what the chances are that you'll be paying Landeskog completely next year, and he's not on long-term injured reserve. And even Nichushkin, although I think we may talk in the coming months because he'll be out for at least 6 months.
At least until November.
About possible options, things the Avalanche can do, perhaps trades,
buyouts, there's
buying
options.
out. There are things you can do.
But Joe Sakic and Chris McFarland have to consider the fact that Landeskog's $7 million and Nichushkin's $6.1 million. So we're talking about $13.1 million. They're $9 million under the cap. That leaves them only 25th in cap space. Now, there'd be plenty of teams that would love to switch spaces with the Avalanche.
Absolutely.
Nathan McKinnon and Mika Rantanen and Cale Makar and not have a lot of cap
They will be
space.
good again next year, if not great.
But you have to consider that the second that Landeskog or Nichushkin is activated, that has to hit the cap.
Yes.
So they look at the $9 million, and you can't just go spend it on Drouin and Middlestat and Tredin and Duhaime or go shopping in free agency and then decide, oh, good, Gabe Landeskog can come back and play. Well, you can't do that. You'll be over. So you have to take a hard look at Landeskog's situation first, because you know it'll be resolved first, and decide when you think he's going to be able to play again or if he's going to play again, and we'll find out as the summer goes along. But you have to account for the fact that realistically, if you were to ask Avs fans, if Gabe Landeskog was ready to go at the beginning of next season, would you want him? Yes. Okay, well, then he connects, and now you have $2 million in cap space, and you haven't signed Duran or Middlestat or any of those guys, and you haven't give extensions to Rantanen and Georgiev. So they have a lot more flexibility, but it can go away really fast.
It can. And yet I think their situation relative to the sport they participate in, they're in better shape than the Nuggets.
Yeah.
Of the two.
Let me
vis-a-vis the salary cap. Now, I'm not talking about forecasting for next year and which team will go further. We're just talking
how you
finances now.
You want to get further than the second round.
Better than you were.
Right.
And get past the second round, which kind of represents a line of demarcation between decent to good and excellent to great. And the trick, and this is why we talked earlier about Kansas City, and even Golden State during its run. You go to 6 finals in 8 years, even if you don't win all 6, that's damn good. You go to 4 Super Bowls in 5 years, you win 3.
And that's a hard cap league.
And you're
There's no
looking at becoming the first team to become
3 in a row. And they're favored to do
champion.
so, and rightly so. Yeah, I mean, and that's in a hard cap situation. Now, the NBA and the NHL, not apples to apples. Only one team as it stands for next season is over the cap as it stands in the NHL, just one. For comparison, as it stands today, no teams in the NBA are under the cap as it stands right now. So things get complicated there. But the Nuggets, as it stands, now have the 9th highest payroll going into next year, $70.7 million over at least the cap. That gets them into past hard caps and into aprons and that sort of thing. So are there teams that are worse? Yes, there are. Are there teams that are worse? They're the competitors. Yeah, the team with the highest payroll payroll next year is Minnesota. Golden State Warriors are up there. Philadelphia 76ers, the Clippers, the Suns are up there. The Lakers are up there. So those are teams that are in the same boat as the Nuggets in so much as they can't necessarily make moves. But I want to give you a moment here to understand when you're over that what they call the second apron or the super tax, right? The Nuggets were just under it last year. If they go over it next year, which it seems it's almost unavoidable that they will, here's what you lose. You cannot access the $5 million taxpayer mid-level exception. You cannot use a trade exception generated by aggregating the salaries of multiple players. So you can't send out more and then say we have an exception that you could throw in an extra $6 million to make the money work on a trade. You can't include cash in a trade.
Right.
You can't include a trade exception generated in any previous year, which you used to be able to do. First round picks 7 years out are frozen. Can't trade them at all. And a team's first round pick is moved to the end, get this, of the first round if they remain in that second apron for 3 out of 5 seasons. The Nuggets have not been there yet, but the penalties are severe and they get more severe. So this becomes really difficult for the Nuggets to get much better. We've joked about it before. What the Nuggets have is the Nuggets. What they've got in their room is more or less what they've got, unless they can make a significant trade. And even that probably doesn't make them much better. It's going to require coaching. It's going to require maturity, whereas the Avalanche have more flexibility to bring in a mix of veterans and young players.
Here's an example of what we're talking about. In contrast to the Nuggets, the teams with cap space. Detroit, no, particularly worried about the Pistons.
Not yet.
Utah, at this point, not particularly worried about the Jazz. Tell you who I'm worried about, though. Oklahoma City having cap space. Orlando having cap space. Philadelphia having cap space. San Antonio and Toronto in a position to create room. Can you imagine adding a second bona fide star to the cast that includes Wembanyama?
And let's not forget the Houston Rockets, who were awfully good as well and gave the Nuggets fits. So the West is going to get tougher. It is designed to equal out. And right now the Nuggets are on top. They were the hunters. Now they're the hunted. They've been hunted. And who knows? Maybe Minnesota or Dallas is next with significant cap issues themselves.
Could be.
But that's the way the NBA is designed now. It makes things much, much more complicated. No salary cap in baseball, obviously, which is good news for the Rockies, who spent $182 million on one Kris Bryant. We'll get to him in a moment as he returns to the purple and black. But I want to remind you that for the last 4 years, you've probably been overwhelmed. You've heard all the ads for online sports betting. You've heard them. You've seen them, that they're omnipresent, whether it's anywhere you're looking on the internet, top to bottom. You can recite probably a few in your sleep. I know I certainly can. So we're going to add one more to the pile, which seems like, geez, Sean, what are you doing? But this one's actually going to make it easier for you. Mile High Sports gathered all of the best sign-up bonuses and offers, and we've put them on one page on our website. So instead of you having to keep track of which one gives you this bonus or which one gives you this for second chance or this matches your deposit, we have it all in one place. Wanted to make it easy for folks interested in jumping into betting to find the best options for them to save the most money. So we research all of them and bring them all together in a way that makes it simple to know what's available. And that's bonus bets, second chance bets, deposit matches, all of it's all in one place. It's easy to find. Go to milehighsports.com today or download our mobile app, which is, by the way, how you can also get this program and all the other things that we put together. And then when you're there, click on Colorado Sports Betting, and then you'll get all of the latest and greatest options and all of the greatest offers from all of the sports books that you could use here in Colorado. It's just that simple. Think of that as your bonus from your friends right here at Mile High Sports.
And, of course, we talk about Denver golf on a regular basis. It's time to get out and play. It's that time of year again. Yes, when we hit May, we're basically done with snowstorms and rainfall. Hey, that's late afternoon. Plenty of time to get out and enjoy yourself around the city of Denver with the perfect golf pass for you, whether you're just getting started or played for decades. The Practice and Play Pass is for those new to the game to practice what they have learned and transition it onto the golf course. The Learn and Play Pass 1.0 is geared toward adult beginners, people who have never held a club or players looking to advance their game. And if you've been playing for a while, you can try the Learn and Play Pass 2.0, which is designed to be flexible for intermediate players looking to improve and fine-tune their game. Just looking to have some fun, the Friends and Family Pass lets you play mini golf or hit the driving range, and you can bring up to 3 guests with you every single time. With 8 unique courses and opportunities for all skill levels, Denver Golf is perfect for anyone. Learn more about everything related to Denver Golf, all it has to offer, by visiting cityofdenvergolf.com. Come home to play. Denver Golf is your neighborhood course.
Well, over in baseball, Colorado Rockies will continue to be going. It might be you're just tuning into the Rockies season right now, which is completely understandable for sure. It's not going well. Long story short, 15-32, 16 games out of first in the NL West. A little more promising for the wild card, but get back to 500 first, and that would require a 17-game winning streak. That's probably not happening, because after the Rockies had their little winning streak, they've now lost 4 in a row after losing in Oakland last night. But they did get some good news in the fact that Kris Bryant, after missing 31 games with the back strain, did return to the lineup. Yeah, he went 0 for 4 and had a strikeout, but just seeing
Picking
him
up where he left off.
Yeah, well, there's that. But still seeing him on the field alone is a good thing for the Rockies, who desperately need a little more offensive punch.
They definitely need help at first base. We talked yesterday about how that 3/4 of the infield is basically okay. Brendan Rodgers is off to
and they've been going with
Alaris
Montero
some injuries
in his
but I like the left side of the infield. We talked about McMahon and Tovar at length yesterday. The outfield, they're a little banged up in spots. They're aging in other areas, but there is maybe a glimmer of hope that some of these young players continue to blossom. Tovar had a big game last night.
First ever 2 home run game.
Unfortunately, the bullpen seems irreparably damaged. And usually with the Rockies, because their starting pitchers don't most of the time give you a lot of innings.
It's a few weeks early for the bullpen
wear
to collapse.
Down your bullpen.
Yeah.
Well, the Rockies started early this year with their bullpen coming apart even before they were worn down.
Right.
And last night, Lawrence and Tyler Kinley blew the ball game.
Right.
In the last 2 innings, they had a 4-2 lead and ended up losing in Oakland to the A's. Strange year in Major League Baseball. The White Sox are 9-10 in their last 19. They're still dreadful, but for the last 3-4 weeks, almost a month, they've been playing pretty close to 500 ball. The A's, as of right now, are winning 4 out of every 10 games. No one expected them to be nearly that good. And even the Miami Marlins in the month of May are 9-10. Heck, the Rockies are 8-10, even on a 4-game losing streak during the month of May. We have 12 teams in Major League Baseball, though, that are either playing 600 ball or better or 400 ball or worse. That's an extraordinarily high number for any time of the baseball season. Over the last few years, you had 8 out of 30 teams in that category in 23. Then it was 9 the year before that, 7, 9, 8, 8, 5, 2, 4. Now there are 12. I don't know that it will stay at 12, but baseball isn't quite as balanced as it's been. And if you're bad right now, Rockies, Marlins, White Sox, you're likely to stay bad. You'll stay in last place. Houston was in last place for a while in the American League West. Houston's now up to third and only 2 games out of second and only 5 games out of first. Houston will win the American League West in 2024.
Pour one out for poor old Cal Quantrill last night for the Rockies. 6 innings pitched, only 3 hits allowed, 2 runs, 1 walk, 8 Ks. And ends up with a no decision for Quantrill in his 10 starts for the Rockies, which in and of itself, I guess, a pretty good feat. But in his 10 starts for the Rockies, 7 of them of the quality start variety. The rest of the team has 8. And Quantrill has a 3.59 ERA and a 1.25
best pitcher.
Walks and hits per innings pitched by far the Rockies' best pitcher, and he's
Certainly
done consistently so.
Yeah.
And the poor guy's 3-3 now, and hasn't probably has deserved certainly better. Good news, obviously, for Tovar, his first ever multi-home run game. It comes in a loss, but Tovar's breakout offensively has obviously coincided with his stellar defense. So some promising things there as well. And give the Rockies credit. Joining a little late, by the way, in the home run celebration. Shohei Ohtani at one point had the the Samurai hat he brought to the Angels, and now we're with the Dodgers, and everyone has their own little deals they do. Well, the Rockies have one. It's at least on point now. Tovar's walking around with a ski helmet and goggles on in the dugout after getting his second home run. So at least bringing a little bit of the fun back to baseball, on brand for the Rockies. But for Kris Bryant, who's off to an atrocious start, batting 137, 7 hits in 51 at-bats, 19 strikeouts during that span of time, only 4 walks, an on-base percentage of .254, and even in only 14 games, wins above replacement, which
was
is
the MVP 8 years ago.
Yeah. And the wins or replacement stat, the metric there, actually just adds up over the course of the season. So it's not a by per game thing. It's over the course of a season. In 14 games in which Bryant has played, he's a negative .4, which means just the average Major League Baseball player starting would give you 0.4 more wins on the season than Kris Bryant has given the Rockies in only a 14-game span. So it has been an abject disaster. Is there any reason to believe that things will get around a little bit better this time? Because they don't need Bryant to hit 40 home runs, but they sure need him to hit 20, 25. And Sandy, his slugging percentage, which I know we don't use as much as we used to, is lower than his on-base percentage. Trying to find that in baseball is hard. On-base percentage is .254, slugging .235. For comparison, guys who you're not thinking of as big-time hitters on this team, like Sean Bouchard, his slugging is at least .370, over 100 and almost 150 points better than Bryant's.
There are a couple of numbers on the Rockies that are disturbing. Charlie Blackmon's been a wonderful player here. His on-base percentage at the moment is .299. That shocks me. The batting average, .225. Okay. But Charlie usually draws a sufficient number of walks to at least have an on-base percentage in the 300s.
Always been
somewhere. Not so far this year. Rogers' OPS is at .631. That's on-base plus slugging percentage. Yes, they're getting good years out of Doyle, as we mentioned yesterday. Tovar, .782 OPS. McMahon is a top 20 man in Major League Baseball when it comes to OPS. He's 19th at .881. That's sensational. That's 900 or over. If you're doing that year after year, you're going to the Hall of Fame.
With a .950 plus fielding percentage.
Yeah, which
it's not elite,
it's not great,
but it's not bad,
and it's not to be equated with OPS. But he's
having
correct.
a year. He's having a very good year.
Offensively, he's having a great year. He's slugging .497. He's on base at a .384 clip, which is out of this world for somebody not batting leadoff
and somebody who doesn't take a lot of walks historically.
He doesn't take a lot of walks. He does strike out a lot, but when he hits for power. He hits with authority. Here's the problem with the Rockies. They're real slow, but they lack power. And see, 25th home runs out of 30 teams in Major League Baseball and tied for 26 in stolen bases. That's really all.
I'm not a GM. I'm sure Bill Schmidt's forgotten more about baseball than I'll ever know. But
that's the problem. He's forgotten it.
But generally, if you have a team that doesn't have power and your counterpoint is, but we're also slow, that's a problem, especially when you play in the best home run hitter park ever created statistically and the best gap double park ever created. So it's not about speed, just about steals, but it's about the ability to get doubles and triples, the ability to go first to third, the ability sometimes to go first to home, certainly score.
They never go from first to third.
And this is a team that just doesn't move very quickly. And to do that, look, I get it. The Rockies have had success at times pre-Humidor when their roster resembled a beer league softball team and guys just up there to mash and either it went 450 feet or they strike out.
It was silly to run at Coors Field pre-Humidor. It was silly to run.
Right.
You play for the big inning.
Right. You'd Earl Weaver that thing.
Yes.
Just go ahead
3-run
and
homers.
keep trying to smash it. But now in the Humidor era, it's kind of funny. The Rockies got into that world, and really now it's become standardized across the major leagues. The Rockies are not the only team with humidors. Many teams have humidors because it equalizes the play. It sort of negates altitude and to a certain extent even humidity, which varies a lot between all sorts of the towns with Major League Baseball plays in.
Of course.
But the Rockies, oddly, by doing it, and I've argued against what was still, I guess we'll call it the Bridich barrier as well, that takes away the home runs. And I get their argument is that it makes life easier for their pitchers. Okay, but the home runs it takes away 81 times a game, 81 times a year are yours.
Coors Field is not per se a home run park. It's an extra base park because of the vast expanse.
There are home run parks that actually hit at a higher rate than Coors.
Left field to right field, from the left field line to the right field.
Right.
There's so much room.
But it's the high batting average park.
High batting average park.
And high
extra base park. Not necessarily the greatest home run park ever constructed. Certainly the humidor was installed. That's reduced the number of home runs hit, the rate of home runs hit. But, the strikeouts we talked about, and I promise you folks, we'll get off the subject of strikeouts.
No, we won't.
We won't be talking about this every single day.
Oh,
we'll get off. We'll get off.
Okay.
We'll get off it. But this is, there's some good news, as we've indicated. There's also some bad news. The Rockies have not one, not two, but three players who are in the top 25 in Major League Baseball in total strikeouts. Tovar is tied for 8th. Doyle is tied for 18th. McMahon is tied for 24th. Tovar is in pace to strike out 211 times. Doyle 191 and McMahon 179. I don't mind McMahon striking out 179 times nearly as much as I would mind it with Doyle, and especially with Tovar. 211 strikeouts is ridiculous.
You better be a 30 home run guy if you're going to even come close.
And
he
might be a 15 to 20 home run guy, but he won't hit 30.
No.
He strikes out way too much for a guy whose batting average is 279 and on base percentage is 313.
Yeah, the Rockies as a team, 446 strikeouts. That is 6th in the majors in strikeouts.
Yes.
But you have to look at it in context. Out of the 5 teams ahead of them, nobody has even 30 fewer walks than 30 more walks. Sorry, every team has 30 or more walks more than the Rockies, 123, because the Rockies are 6th in strikeouts and they are 27th in walks. That's a major problem. And maybe you look at it, it's home runs. They play Coors Field. They're 25th in the league in home runs
as we indicated. And
that's the problem.
18th in OPS, playing half your games at Coors Field. Your on base percentage is 20th. They shouldn't be in the bottom half of the league in so many of these offensive categories, playing half their games in this ballpark.
No, and that's not exactly like they have the 90s Braves pitching staff, Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz running them out there every single time. So for the Rockies, it is difficult. They will continue their road trip. They have 2 more in Oakland, both tonight and then the day game tomorrow, and then they will be back home for 6 against the Phillies and the Cleveland Guardians, trying to make a little bit of ground there in the wild card chase, but they'll have to be better offensively than that because they got the kind of pitching that they had hoped for last time out, and it did not get them what they needed. So we'll take a look at the Denver Broncos. The Broncos, obviously, with OTAs underway today, they will wrap up tomorrow, but I do want to remind you, talked about it a little bit earlier, but if you're selling your home, well, our friends at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team are the right people to talk to as well. And here's why. This Colorado home market has been absolutely crazy for years. And knowing when to sell and when to get the maximum, we know houses are at an all-time high in value. We know that there really isn't necessarily a bad time to sell. But when you're talking about the most valuable asset you ever own, you want the best time to sell. You want to know the best way to sell it and maximize that value. When you want to do that, you want to talk to my friends Dave and Mark at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team. That doesn't mean you're talking about luxury homes. It's about the high-end luxury service they provide, whether you're buying or selling. But when you're selling, you need experts that know Colorado's market, when the highs are, when the lows are, so you can jump on them at the right time. Experience and stability matters, and that's what they do. Privately held company. You're not dealing with the big folks. You're not dealing with whatever agent they assign you. You're dealing with Dave and Mark, 25 years in the same offices. We know that inventory is still low around the Denver metro area, so if you're looking to sell, you're in a good spot. Homes that are priced right sell really, really fast. So let Dave and Mark help you find that sweet spot with a free valuation. Spring is already here. Summer's coming, and you know that folks are spending their weekends driving around all the neighborhoods in Colorado looking for their next home. So there's no reason for you to wait. Let Dave and Mark represent you. Make sure that you're set up to get everything you deserve when you are selling your home. Call Dave and Mark at the Key Real Estate Group at 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST, or visit them today at keyrealestategroup.com. The situation for the Denver Broncos, Sandy, is both clear and not clear, depending on what we're talking about. The Broncos would perhaps have you believe that it's not clear at the quarterback position who's going to be QB1, whether the idea is Bo Nix, who was just drafted 12th, spoiler alert, it's him, or whether it's holdover Jared Stidham, who was paid a lot of money by Sean Payton because he thought he was a future NFL starter, or the newly acquired Zach Wilson, who was really nothing but a flyer and an opportunity for Payton to see how much of a quarterback whisperer he really is. Nix is going to be the starting quarterback for the Broncos, assuming he's healthy, on week 1, and hopefully for years to come. We know that. What we don't know is not only who he's going to throw to, but who's his primary target going to be. One, Cortland Sutton isn't available. He's not at camp. He wants a new deal.
I'll make a bargain, and I won't include Sean in this part of the bargain.
Me or Peyton?
I promise to stop talking every single day about how inept the Rockies are offensively, particularly on a pace to maybe set a record for most times striking out, although they have some challengers in that category for 2024. I promise to do that in exchange for our print and digital friends. I'm begging them now. Stop talking about quarterback competition.
Oh,
stop it. As Troy Renk pointed out in the Denver Post today in a fine column, since Bo Nix was drafted, he has spoken with, at various times, John Elway, Peyton Manning. Oh, and by the way, he's hung out with Tom Brady and Jay-Z. Bo Nix is becoming famous. That's Troy's lead today. Jarrett Stidham is not becoming famous. Zach Wilson is becoming infamous for incompetence. There is no doubt
up here in Colorado,
that
just
throughout the preseason, you'll see plenty of Bo Nix. Not all the time, because he's the starting quarterback and they don't want him to get hurt. You will see Bo Nix in week 1. I promise you, barring injury, you will see Bo Nix at quarterback in week 1. You don't talk about him in the way that Sean Payton has, and I'm going to quote now. He said, Payton, watching Nix is almost like watching a good golfer. He added to that in terms of repeatable swings. You get the idea. Also praising how the former Oregon quarterback plays with patience and operates efficiently in the pocket. That's the holy grail for Sean
Payton.
Patience and operating within the pocket with poise. That's Drew Brees.
Right.
That's the gold standard. And this guy's going to ride the bench watching Jarrett Stidham and or Zach Wilson. Really now.
You went out of your way to pick him number 12 overall. The funny thing is he's such a Sean Payton type of prospect that it was the worst kept secret in the entire NFL that the Denver Broncos would pick Bo Nix 12. And if they had to move up a spot or two to do it, they probably would. And other teams didn't value Bo Nix that way. And so I will give the Broncos credit for not overreacting, because they realized no one else was going to pick Nix earlier than 12, and they could just sit and wait and let him land in his lap. Even if Michael Penix goes higher in a shock to Atlanta, they could stay calm because nobody else had Nix graded the way the Broncos did.
They were a little worried for a few minutes when Penix was drafted.
Maybe a little bit, but not enough to move. And it turned out that they got their guy.
The Vikings ended up being the ones to move,
right,
to draft a quarterback that the Broncos never
wanted. And when we told you that long before the draft, even when the smoke screen was going up, Bo Nix was always the Broncos guy. They got him, and that's all the more reason to believe he's going to be the starter. The question now, Cortland Sutton is holding out for a new contract. Mandatory minicamp starts June 11th. Mandatory being the key word. Don't expect Cortland Sutton to be anywhere near Dove Valley until June 11th. Just a guess today, Sandy, do you think he'll be there on the 11th? Or do you think all of a sudden we have a real story on our hands?
The Broncos consistently say, and this is George Payton saying this, not Sean Payton, that vis-a-vis Cortland Sutton, he is in a good place, and therefore the Broncos aren't concerned. it seems clear that Courtland Sutton wants a new contract, and equally clear that the Broncos have no intention of giving him a new contract. He's got $27 million left on his deal, but only $2 million of those dollars are guaranteed.
Right. And as we know, the NFL guarantees the only thing you pay attention to.
We have reached an impasse here between the Broncos and Courtland Sutton. My point about the Bronco quarterback situation, believe it or not, being less uncertain than their wide receiving situation, certainly their tight end situation, is that they know who their number one quarterback is going to be. They have no idea. Courtland Sutton should be their number one wide receiver, but they have no idea whether Courtland Sutton will be starting the season as a Denver Bronco. So they don't really have a number one receiver at this point. They certainly don't have a number one tight end unless you count the oft-injured Greg Dulcich, who's had right hamstring problems since he came out of the womb, apparently.
Well, I feel you.
I think he strained his hamstring coming out.
Well, I can't pick on him for that. I probably strained it today myself just sitting into this chair. But you're right. The situation there.
You're not a world-class athlete.
Obviously, yeah. I'm not proud of it. It's not like I think it's great. Don't get me wrong. But I could just relate. That's all. I mean, everything pulls. I get it. You reach a point and everything falls apart.
I've got a sore back that stiffens up from time to time. But I'm 66 years old.
What's league minimum? Can I pull a hamstring and still get league minimum?
He's barely a third my age.
Well, sometimes,
and he keeps pulling that. What is it? The right hamstring, I think.
Sometimes it happens. It's the way it goes. But in Sutton's case, it's interesting. You do know he does want a new contract, and it's by what he's not saying. The reports in the media have been consistent. He wants a new contract. National media members, local media members
wants more guaranteed money.
And not once Courtland Sutton has popped on his social media or anything and said, "Oh, that's not true. I'm just working out with my friends in Florida because I'm working out."
However, he has gone on social media to bemoan the departures of the Wilsons and Justin Simmons of the world.
He has indeed. And of course, we don't know where Justin Simmons lands, but we do know where Russell Wilson is. And that team, by the way, could use another wide receiver, especially one that caught 10 touchdowns from that same quarterback last year.
And who was close friends with their presumed starting quarterback.
So this is one of the challenges. But you look at the next candidates up. I mean, you start with Josh Reynolds, is the most accomplished. They signed him in free agency away from Detroit, of which he had a great year. Of course, everybody apparently had a great year when Jared Goff has been throwing to him for the last couple. And Josh Reynolds has had kind of trouble jumping to that next level. He was good when he was young with the Rams and Matt Stafford throwing there. He was good with the Lions and Goff, not great.
But maybe he's on a lower tier from Sutton in the sense that he catches 50 passes a year for 650 to 700 yards.
I think that's the target.
Mixes in maybe 3, 4, 5 touchdowns. That's fine.
Yeah.
But that's not your number one receiver.
Right.
So they have a bunch of 2s and 3s at the wide receiver.
Well, the next guys that are probably the most promising, that have the most the easiest path to a starting time, are rookies and a second-year guy. Troy Franklin, we talked about him a little bit yesterday. If you missed any one of the programs, you can find it on the Mile High Sports app or on our YouTube channel as well, Mile High Sports. But Troy Franklin drafted out of the 4th round from Oregon, where he was Bo Nix's top target. There's a lot of synergy there, although they did most of their work, speaking again of Sean Payton's gold standard, in the middle of the field. Franklin and Nix were very effective in the middle of the field. That may indicate that perhaps you may use him in the slot, but of course, if Sutton isn't there, you've got to use him on the outside. Franklin is going to have an opportunity to play anyway. He's certainly in line to be the wide receiver number 3, even if Sutton plays, because of his ability, by a lot of people graded to be probably higher than where he was selected in the 4th. Certainly his rapport with Nix, a lot to like. But putting Franklin, let's say you don't get things worked out with Sutton, Reynolds being the 1, Franklin being the 2, now you're asking both of these guys to do something that's probably maybe a little bit ahead of where their development is.
Maybe a lot ahead of where their development is.
And that ends up hurting Bo Nix.
It could. And I think that their wide receivers as a group need Nix more than he needs them. I think there is a floor with Nix that is a little bit higher than Bronco quarterbacking floors have been over the last 8 years.
Yeah.
I think his floor is a little higher.
I do too.
But if you want him to become one of the 10, 15 best quarterbacks in the NFL, you're going to need a lot more from your wide receiving group than they appear to have at the moment. I think it is fair to say if you're dividing wide receiver groups into thirds, that the Broncos have a lower third group.
Certainly,
although in recent years, they've been at times the highest paid group of wide receivers
overvalued
in the NFL.
I think dramatically.
Completely overvalued. And a lot of that had to do with Peyton's decision to give Tim Patrick, whose injuries
That's George
aren't
Payton's decision.
Peyton's fault.
Right.
Obviously, George Payton's. But also Cortland Sutton, long-term contracts.
Although this deal with Sutton looks as it's a little more team-friendly at this point. That's one of the
now
reasons the Broncos
because there's
don't
no
have any desire
guaranteed
to mess
money
with
in the
it.
back end of it.
For the record, last year, Cortland Sutton had 59 catches for 772 yards and 10 touchdowns. Jerry Jeudy was the number 2 receiver, 54 catches, only 5 fewer than Sutton. 758 yards, only 14 fewer than Cortland Sutton, but 2 touchdowns. That's the concern. But Jeudy has moved on. When you go look at Reynolds playing with, at least conceptually, if you were to try to put ourselves in the mind of Sean Payton for a moment, a quarterback he'd prefer to have Jared Goff over Russell Wilson. Josh Reynolds finished with 40 catches for 608 yards and 5 touchdowns. Now, maybe he could do that again, but that was good for the third spot because Sam Laporta was so good at tight end. When you go to the last guy in that puzzle, though, the Broncos' next best receiver was Samaje Perine with 455, and then Marvin Mims Jr. with 377. Mims will be in his second year at being picked second round out of Oklahoma. But he feels more like the kind of player that you're going to have to use situationally. If, again, they don't get things done with Sutton, you probably have to turn him into a slot receiver and hope for the best, right?
I guess. Don't you think the hope, and I understand that he hasn't played in 2 years. Don't you hope that Patrick becomes your slot receiver?
You can't tell because I'm behind a desk, but I'm not a large man. Marvin Mims is 1 inch taller and about 10 pounds heavier. I'm not going to last real long in the NFL, and I wouldn't have even at 22. Marvin Mims Jr. is in better shape, and he's a lot faster, so he will. But that's not a guy you want to sit there and get knocked around all the time.
Did it surprise you, though, that for a guy who averaged over 22 yards a catch and had, I think, 3 catches of more than 40 yards
to improve the passing offense, you couldn't get in.
When you needed to make more big plays, he couldn't get on the field.
Nope. And to me, that's still shocking. It really is.
The excuse was, well, we've got Jerry Jeudy. Well, you traded Jerry Jeudy and got next to nothing back in return for him.
Magic
so
beans.
This idea that Jerry Jeudy forced them to use Mims from the line of scrimmage almost not at all.
It was fewer than a third of the snaps.
It made no sense.
Right.
It made no sense to me. And I understand that Sean Payton has a habit of profiling at certain positions, and guys either measure up or they don't. And I'm not saying he doesn't like Mims because he was in charge of the draft in which Mims was the first draft pick the Broncos took. In the Sean Payton era, Mims was the first pick the Broncos took. But I think their idea this year is that Mims will play a little more from the line of scrimmage, but because of the rules changes in the kicking game, that'll be much more valuable as a return man than he was, and much more able than he was last year when, as I recall, he was a Pro Bowl.
He was one of the few Pro Bowlers on the team. And
he was one of the Pro Bowl selections.
As a returner.
One of the few. As a returner.
And Peyton, with the changes to the kickoff rules, Peyton's talked a lot about Mims in that role. That may be part of it, too. Of course, the Broncos have other things they need to attend to. Tomorrow, the OTAs will wrap up, and we're expected to hear from Coach Sean Payton. We'll talk about more of that in a bit, but I want to remind you, with warmer weather here, time to get outside and have some fun with family and friends. And you want to entertain at the house? Sure, of course you do, but sometimes you need a break from the kitchen. Or if you're me, you're just a terrible cook. So sometimes you need some help, and that's what you do with Rolling Smoke Barbecue. I actually, whether you have a half dozen folks, 50 or more, you pick up the best barbecue in town from one of Rolling Smoke's 4 locations. I actually stopped there last night from the corner of Dry Creek and University in Centennial, got the honey bourbon sausage, got a hot link, smoked turkey, delicious. probably ate more of it than I necessarily should have, but had enough for leftovers for lunch today, so I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Very
4
good.
locations: Aurora in the Stanley Marketplace, the original spot in Golden inside the Golden Mill, of course, Dry Creek and University in Centennial, and the newest location on 38th Avenue, now open in Wheat Ridge. And if you're headed to a show at Red Rocks this summer, as many of you are, you can find them there too. The place that gets barbecue up there, that's Rolling Smoke, so give them a try. Rolling Smoke Barbecue, and you can order and find them online at rollingSmokeBBQ.com.
We know that some of you, quite a few of you, as the days go on, are subscribed to the Sandy and Sean podcast. We thank you for that, for listening to our show on demand whenever it fits your schedule. That's the whole idea behind podcasts. And we have plenty more that are at least as good as what we do here daily. Ryan Blackburn, as you found out yesterday, keeps you up to date on what's happening with the Nuggets with the Pickaxe and Roll podcast. We have Arif Dean, always on the ice with the Colorado Avalanche, so check out his podcast, Hockey Mountain High. Mile High baseball fans know they get the latest and get the straight scoop on the Rockies from Drew Kreisman and the 20th and Blake podcast. And the question we've already answered, but we know it will continue to be asked: will Bo Nix be not only the starter, but the answer at quarterback for the Broncos after 8 years of quarterbacking futility? You get the latest on that and more with the Broncos podcast with Troy Rank, as our friend from the Denver Post is featured on the Mile High Sports Podcast Network. So all that and a lot more, just search Mile High Sports wherever you get your podcasts.
Tomorrow, OTAs wrap up for the Broncos at Dove Valley. Of course, they'll have another set of OTAs next week, so things come a little bit fast and furious this time of year. But it will be the first time we'll be able to hear from Sean Payton and presumably Bo Nix and maybe somebody else as the OTAs come to an end and the first opportunity to get drills, non-contact OTAs. At this point, obviously, you're just working with individual units and workouts, but there is a little on-field part of that.
Don't you think Sean Payton will come clean tomorrow and announce that Bo Nix is his starting quarterback?
I do not.
You don't?
No,
really?
I don't expect that from Sean Payton. I expected to talk about how all 3 of our guys looked really good. I love what I'm seeing from Zach Wilson. I think there's a lot there that we can get out of Zach Wilson.
Exactly what are you seeing from Jarrett Stidham and or Zach Wilson?
Great things, Sandy. It'll be great things. It's going to be great things. Yeah, it's going to be really good. They'll have picked up the playbook.
Notice how he's quite a bit more specific when he talks about Bo Nix.
Right. But everyone will have picked up the playbooks really well. They've, let me think of what was the phrase? They'll have handled everything that they threw at them. They'll definitely have done that.
Payton's big on that because remember before the draft, they were throwing the playbook at quarterbacks like 12 hours before.
Apparently Bo Nix memorized the entire playbook in 12 hours, which tells me a couple things interesting about the NFL, right? Either Bo Nix is wasting his formidable intellectual talent on the football field and should go cure cancer or make moon launches or whatever.
Or write books.
Or who knows.
Photographic memory.
Or, and heaven forbid NFL coaches ever let this get out, that perhaps NFL playbooks are not the most complicated thing ever constructed by man, and maybe they can be picked up in 12 hours. And maybe there's a little bit of room in the middle. But of course, to hear it, like, you have to be a Rhodes Scholar and spend 14 months in seclusion doing nothing but studying your iPad to learn the plays, unless you're Bo Nix and I was thinking Aaron Rodgers, and he doesn't need to look at a playbook anyway. But you're talking about a couple of those things. But this is where some of the mythology tends to come out. The playbook's so condensed and horrible, and it's so hard, and nobody learns it. And Bo Nix learned it in 5 minutes, and Russell Wilson, despite being a borderline Hall of Famer, never could pick it up even after 2 years. Okay, so you have to take some of the spin out of the equation, but I am intrigued to hear what Payton says about his youngsters, about his rookies, because there are rookies that are in line for playing time, and we'll talk about more of them as this offseason goes along. But I look
especially at the running back position.
Estimate running back out of Notre Dame may have a spot to get big time carries, and there's a bit of a logjam there. Samaje Perine, as we talked about, was the team's 3rd leading receiver.
He was more of a receiver than he was a ball carrier for the second half of the year.
Yeah, the running back position is one that's interesting. We don't expect them to address the Cortland Sutton situation. They're going to say the same thing. He's in a good place. We're fine. This is one of the times when you'll start hearing coaches say, "Oh, this is voluntary," right up until they're mad, and then they'll remind people that it's voluntary, but you should be here. So, but in Sutton's case, They won't,
if you're
because
really
they'd like Sutton to come back on the cheap side. So there will be that. But there are some interesting things to glean from this. And I guess the first question to ask, and I know it's not that simple, Sandy, is this really all about the offense? I mean, is the Broncos' improvement really going to come almost entirely from the offense? They did lose guys on defense.
You
I
lost
think you
Jewell,
overcome
you
Josie
lost
Jewell, but
Simmons.
losing Simmons is tough.
Simmons' loss is much more
absolutely
damaging, I think.
I think Kareem Jackson's time came and went,
yes.
but
he wasn't going to play last year. If Caden Stearns hadn't gotten hurt,
right,
Kareem Jackson would have been out a lot sooner than he was.
Yes. And so I think on defense, you have similar pieces. I think you've improved a little bit, but it feels as if, at least after Justin Simmons came back, the defense was more or less fine, not spectacular, fine. The question is, how will it be without Justin Simmons again?
Well, compared to the way it was in Miami without Simmons in week 3,
well,
anything would have been fine compared to that day of disaster, which might have been the single worst defensive performance in the history of the league.
Very kind of Mike McDaniel not to set the new NFL scoring record.
He could have, if he
could have easily gotten to 80 plus if he had wanted.
Oh,
they decided
he gotten to 100 if he had wanted.
So you understand that the defense is part of it, but I guess I look at this offseason. You have a new quarterback one. You have a new wide receiver. We talked about Franklin. We talked about Estime. We talked about the additions to the line last year, and then a couple new this year as well. This feels like, to me, the growth of the Broncos has to come, not exclusively, but very nearly exclusively from the offensive side of the ball. And that's what I'm fascinated about during this OTA process.
Well, here's another pet peeve of mine. We read about it during the season last year, and I never quite understood the basis for believing that there was some kind of revival of outstanding offensive line play reminiscent of the Bronco championship teams of the late 90s. I never picked up on that through my own observation, but I kept reading about it. I'm not sure how that notion got started. Quinn Miners is a Pro Bowl, possibly future All-Pro at right guard, and he will be paid.
You have one absolute rock.
Cushenberry was fine, but he's gone now. Your play at left guard and right tackle for two very expensive free agents in Powers and McGlinchey. Powers at left guard, McGlinchey at right tackle might have been as good as And then you had Bowles at left tackle, and I don't know that there's anybody who believes that Garrett Bowles at age 32 will be a Bronco for longer than 2024.
Right.
Beyond 2024, he won't be here.
Hard to believe his best days are ahead of him for sure. So for the Broncos,
not at age 32.
Right. The line play is a major concern. And without that, of course, you can't keep Bo Nix in that nice pocket that Sean Payton wants to see. Well, everything breaks down. And the line is still, for the Broncos, the major concern. It's always the major concern. The dirty little secret of NFL football is still, no matter how much you highlight the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, the highlight plays, you win at the line of scrimmage and you win with your offensive defensive line. Football is still boiled down to, I line up big guys, you line up big guys, our big guys push each other, and the ones that do the better job, usually we end up winning the game.
There has never been a Super Bowl winner who didn't at least have a serviceable offensive line. And I would say go back and do the research on this, but we've had, 58 Super Bowls now?
Well, you talk about the dynasties, and
I would
start off the show,
55, 56 at least involved excellent offensive lines. I think of the 2015 Broncos, who were not a good offensive line during the regular season, but became one for reasons we've discussed before on this program and probably will again. It became an excellent offensive line, both in terms of pass blocking and run blocking in the playoffs following the 2015 regular season. The Kansas City Chiefs have lost one of 4 Super Bowls across the last 5 years. You know why they lost it? Because their offensive line was in disrepair.
That would have been
what did they do about it?
That would have been one of the few teams that
they
would have won.
lost Tyreek Hill, but they fixed their offensive
had Creed
line.
Humphrey and went and got their offensive line repaired. Absolutely. And then they go back and win a couple more. So that's the trick. You're exactly right. We could be talking about a team that would have had a even more impressive run had they had a slightly better offensive line. Mahomes and company was almost enough to overcome it. But if that shows you right there that this modern dynasty for the NFL, if their inability to finish one was purely due to the offensive line, and it was, remember back at that Super Bowl.
I remember
Mahomes
that game. All I remember about is Patrick Mahomes running for his life on every pass play.
Right. And they still had a chance to win that game. But so, I mean, you can't sneak away with subpar line play. It's just not possible. And so for the Broncos, that is the key. But there's not that much new there. Four of the starters should return. The center position is a bit up for grabs, and then we'll find out more about that. But hopefully the consistency of not changing too many guys over, because you try to microwave an offensive line, it often doesn't work unless your quarterback's Patrick Mahomes, of course, and then we saw what happened with the Chiefs.
But the one thing you couldn't say last year about the offensive line was that they couldn't stay together, couldn't stay healthy.
No, they were very durable. In fact, as good as any Broncos offensive line has ever been, one of the very best in the league when you're talking about their starting five getting snaps. So now you have to add in a new center to that. Alex Forsythe of Oregon, one of the guys that will be in the mix for it potentially with Bo Nix. But I guess I'm with you. It is about the offense, but even though you can add all those pieces, we talked about wide receiver, we talked about quarterback, if you can't block for him, none of it's going to matter. And if you want Bo Nix to reach his potential, you have to keep him upright and keep his jersey clean.
And have to allow him to throw into the middle of the field. And that means you need a slot receiver, which I'm not sure they have.
A tight end,
and you need a tight end, which I'm not sure they have, at least not a healthy one. They have a versatile one in Troutman. I'll give Troutman that. There is nothing that Troutman does badly, but he is not a premier tight end in any of the phases of tight end play that you generally evaluate. He's not. You hope for a little bit of what we've seen from Dulcich when he has played, and what's it been, 12 games, maybe?
For Dulcich in his career?
For 2 years?
It's not a lot.
That sound about right?
Yep. And they've been, unfortunately.
Don't they play 34 every 2 years?
Yeah.
In the NFL? Yeah, I know the Broncos never play more than 34 over the last 8 years, but 34 and you play 12.
Yeah. Greg Dulcich in his career has 12 games, 33 catches for 436 yards and 2 touchdowns. Promising if you could just keep him on the field.
That's fine. And most of that came in 2022.
Yes.
Almost none of it in 2023.
3 catches for 25 yards last year. That's it.
By Bronco tight end standards, that was relatively prolific.
It was productive. They're going to need more for sure. Obviously, with OTAs concluding, at least this version of the OTAs concluding on Thursdays, we're looking forward to hearing from Coach Sean Payton, of course, presumably quarterback Bo Nix, and some of the other Broncos as well. We'll let you know more about
Nix
that
will be
tomorrow.
More interesting than Payton, I suspect.
Probably so. We'll certainly have that for you. On Friday, by the way, after it all wraps up, you talked about the podcast earlier, Cody Rourke will join us and break down that as well on Friday. So we'll make sure we can stay on top of the Broncos for you over the course of the week. So appreciate you joining us today. Obviously, there's a lot going on, even though the Nuggets and Avs are out. That offseason starts today. The Broncos trying to get themselves back into respectability, and the Rockies are doing whatever it is the Rockies are doing. They're playing something that looks baseball adjacent, at least, and some of the young guys are doing something.
If you watch the Rockies for 6 innings, usually the first 6, it's actually
if you would have
not
turned
bad.
It off after 6, you might have actually
You'd have
enjoyed
been very happy.
You just have to pick the right 6. That's the biggest.
Well, it's generally the first 6
challenge.
Rather than the last 6.
Yeah,
say.
Not a lot of late inning heroics, but you know what? It's only May. Maybe there's still an opportunity for more. I hope so, because no other team is playing a significant game for a handful of months. We appreciate you joining us. Danny Bailey is the man that makes this all work, producing, directing, one-man army back there. Thanks to you for watching the program. We appreciate the views. We appreciate the comments. We appreciate however you're listening to it. If you're listening it delayed on a podcast, we appreciate all of it. Make sure you check us out at milehighsports.com, the free Mile High Sports app, or even just go to the YouTube channel at Mile High Sports. Easy peasy. We will catch you then tomorrow. For Sandy Clough, I'm Sean Drotar. Thanks for tuning in. Keep it right here. Lots of stuff coming up on Mile High Sports.